Carol, do you want to talk a little bit about Drew or?
You know, I will, but it's so hard to follow Norman. You know, this is a tough act to follow. But I did want to reinforce what he said so eloquently and build upon what Renee and Egbert and Henry and Hope have all said. We all know that concentrating poverty doesn't work in the housing setting. It doesn't create healthy neighborhoods, and it doesn't work in an education setting either. What we've tried to do is layer on enough pushes to children so that they'll get up to an escape velocity and burst through that gravitational pull of poverty. I think we're starting to see it with Miss Newell's granddaughter. We're seeing it with kids in Eastlake who've had the ability to start with early learning in our community, then go through Drew Charter School. Egbert, we have got our first alumni, our Drew alumni, going to the University of Pennsylvania this year. Wow. And
the number one school.
And again, you know, it's when you layer on this kind of great quality mixed income housing opportunities and killer cradle through college educational opportunities for kids, anything is possible. Anything is possible for every single child who lives in our communities.
Thank you. We'll open it up if we've got time for, I think, maybe 2 questions, if there are any, and then we'll break to the reception. Yes, sir.
I'd be interested to know what's the current status of the Hope 6 program, and if it would be embodied in one of the 2 new programs that the Secretary said the Obama administration is considering, or would it be a standalone program?
The current status is that Hope 6 exists thanks to a bipartisan group of senators like Senator Barbara Mikulski, Democrat from Maryland, and Senator Kit Bond, Republican from Missouri, both of whom had big Hope 6 experiences in Baltimore and St. Louis and Kansas City. And so they kept it alive all these years. The Bush administration had asked that it be zeroed out every year almost of the 8. And it survived, but drastically smaller than the original. The original early on was funded at almost $1 billion, and we were able to make, you know, $50+ million grants. Egbert, 50 is about the size of the larger grants. I think there may have been actually some larger ones in that, but that's what was done early on. In recent years, because they were only able to fund it at maybe 150 million for the whole country or less, the individual grants dropped to 10 million or 15 million, and so the concept could not be carried out in the same way in that fashion. Now this administration is asking for more money for Hope 6 as it exists, but they're also asking for what's called a reauthorization, a new authorization for a new concept, and that is choice neighborhoods. Choice neighborhoods is a lot like Hope 6, only it brings in the human component explicitly, the schools component explicitly, and I think that's a very good thing. It sort of builds on some of the basic concepts of mixed-use financing and new urbanism, physical designs, and so forth, reform of public housing authorities and the way they operate and manage, but it brings in requirements on the human development side, which were not in the original Hope 6. That's fundamentally it. There are still debates as to particular things that are very critical. I mentioned, for example, this issue of one-for-one replacement. If a requirement were to be put in that you had to replace every hard unit on site, then some of the breakthroughs that we've seen in terms of lowering the density, and in other words, it's just kind of practical mathematics. If you've got a high rise of 10 stories, which you don't have a lot of in Atlanta, but in other places, and then you're required, even though you go to townhomes, to replace the same number of units on the same real estate, it almost physically cannot be done. And you end up forcing the same mistakes. So we'll see how all of those things sort out. There's a little bit of a tussle between critics who say we need every single hard unit replaced. It's too precious. We cannot be tearing things down when we have people who are homeless on the streets. And there's a certain logic to that, but putting them all back on the same site makes it impossible to do mixed income, because there's just not enough physical capacity on the sites. You can't do, townhomes as opposed to high rises. You can't do defensible space. You can't do integration of the street grid, because there's no room for streets, and so forth. Egbert, is that a fair?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Any other?
I was just going to comment, as critical as these issues are, I think just like there is need for feedback on healthcare reform, I think it would be a huge mistake to go backwards, because as you heard the Secretary
Henry, please.
as you heard Henry, describe the conditions, those are indeed the conditions. I mean, this was not an exceptional situation. I mean, the thing that struck me is that every time we wrote a Hope 6 application, it was always the same type of thing: terrible crime, families failing in terms of their God-given human potential, no investment in the neighborhoods, failing schools, and this, that, and the other. And I just believe that as a society, we need to do better about American citizens. And when you think about so many of the issues that we struggle with, like the conditions of health, I mean, people trapped in poverty with no decent retail or access to decent recreation because they're afraid that they're going to get mugged or what have you. I hope as a society we can do better than that. So these are not unimportant issues, because these are not isolated issues. This is really about building a stronger society and a healthier nation. I mean, we have 100% perfect vision when we look over at Afghanistan and some of the other places that are struggling, that are suffering from extreme poverty. Well, we don't have the poverty to that extreme, but poverty has the same impact wherever it shows up. And I think that if we pay attention and we get it right, and we've learned some things, and the thing that is distressing is that for some reason everyone thinks that in order to continue progress, everything done had to be perfect. Well, when you find the perfect program, please call me and let me know about it. But the fact of the matter is that things are better. The research has shown that families are doing better, faring better. Education will always be the great equalizer, and as Norman talked about the concentration of poverty in our schools, we can do better, but we've got to have the political will to care enough about what's going on in our communities that we can see a change. I mean, Henry talked about the dramatic drop in crime. Well, I firmly believe that busting up these areas of concentrated poverty have contributed to that. I mean, we have got to stop losing generations of people just because they are temporarily poor. And the national policies have everything to do with that, and how we implement them and how we care, and we've got to invest. For God's sake, if we make this investment one time, let's then build on it rather than go back and say, well, gee, was that 70 years bad experience really bad, or do we need to relive it? I would suggest we shouldn't, and we shouldn't even debate it. We should just build on how we can address the issues that are identified, like perhaps hard-to-house families who need supportive housing, and so on and so forth.